couldn't have a more dramatic finish.
He's missed it! And Brazil in the World Cup! Over. It is now!
With finesse.
Dear, dear! I don't believe it! What a goal we have just seen!
The year is 1896. The Summer Olympics, officially known as the Games of the First Olympiad, were the first international Olympic Games held in modern history. Organized by the International Olympic Committee, which had been created by the French aristocrat Pierre de Coubertin, it was held in the Greek capital of Athens from the 6th to the 15th of April 1896. Only European countries, including athletes from their colonies, participated, along with the United States, in only 9 events. Those events were athletics, cycling, fencing, gymnastics, shooting, swimming, tennis, weightlifting, and wrestling. This was to change, however, by the 1900 Olympic Games, which were held in Paris, when football was first introduced as an exhibition sport and ultimately became the first team sport included in the Olympic Games. As football became more and more popular, the competition started getting bigger and bigger. In 1906, FIFA even intended to organize an international football tournament between nations outside the Olympic Games. The attempt to organize the event was made in Switzerland. Those were early days for international football, and FIFA later described the competition as an utter failure. In 1914, FIFA started getting officially involved in the organization of the Football Olympic event and agreed to recognize the Olympic tournament as the official amateur championship of football. They called it amateur because usually the athletes sent were from different universities and did not represent a team formed out of players from numerous clubs. It wasn't until the 1920 Summer Olympics held in Antwerp, Belgium, that the world's first international football competition took place. 16 teams entered the competition, including Czechoslovakia, Greece, Spain, Luxembourg, Italy, Egypt, Poland, Norway, Yugoslavia, Great Britain, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, France, and Denmark. Out of the 16, only 14 teams showed up. This was due to Switzerland withdrawing before the first round was even made, and Poland failing to show up due to the Polish-Soviet Union war. After a knockout basis, Belgium won the tournament. As the other finalists, Czechoslovakia walked off the field in the 40th minute as a protest to the English referee John Lewis and his linesmen. (1920). It is the year the first concept of a World Cup is initially raised in the FIFA conference in Antwerp. By 1930, despite the British nations having left FIFA on 2 separate occasions, FIFA already had 26 members. In 1929, Henri Delaunay, who was on the FIFA board, proposed to create a World Championship of football. Delaunay had felt that because of the rise of professionalism, international football could not be confined to the Olympics. On December 10, 1926, FIFA created a committee to study the feasibility of organizing a potential World Cup. FIFA decided to exclude football from the 1932 Los Angeles Olympic Games in order to promote the new tournament more as a sport of its own. FIFA president at the time, Jules Rimet, liked the idea and agreed to help organize the event in 1930. The World Cup tournament was decided during the FIFA Congress of May 26, 1928 in Amsterdam. On May 29th, the idea was voted on. 23-5 in favor, 1 abstaining. Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Norway and Sweden voted against the idea. After the votes, it was also decided to set up a committee to study the conditions for the organization of such a tournament. During the 1929 FIFA Congress in Barcelona, Uruguay were designated as hosts of the first World Cup on the 19th of June. Italy, Holland, Hungary, Sweden, Spain and Uruguay all applied to stage the finals. Out of all the countries, Sweden's candidacy seemed rather strange, since they had actually voted against the idea of a World Cup in the 1928 FIFA Congress. Europe was in depression, and many European players, afraid that their jobs would not exist when they returned, were either unable or unwilling to attend the tournament. As a result, some of the most accomplished European teams, including 3-time Olympic gold medalist England and football enthusiasts Italy, Spain, Germany and Holland, did not make an appearance at the first World Cup. After the long debate, and given the fact that Uruguay was the 1928 Summer Olympics champion and also agreed to help pay traveling expenses, Rimet was able to convince Belgium, France, Romania and Yugoslavia to finally make the trip. In Romania, King Carol II even selected the team members himself, gave them a 3-month vacation from their jobs and guaranteed the players would be employed when they returned. The king even threatened that he would shut down the companies if the players were not granted leave. France themselves were initially reluctant to partake. At the French Federation, a majority had voted against the participation. FIFA President Jules Rimet had to convince his own federation for the importance of them participating. Rimet felt French participation was an obligation given his position in FIFA as well as diplomatically, due to good political relations between France and Uruguay. He personally took charge of ensuring vacations from the employers of the French players. The French Federation finally accepted to send the team to the World Cup just weeks prior to sailing on June 2nd. Thus, 16 French players got authorizations from their employers for a leave of 6 to 8 weeks. Belgian manager Hector Guetang had just been appointed that year. It is important to remember that Belgian managers had no say in the team selection. They were merely responsible for the physical training. Belgium star Raymond Bren was suspended from the national team for professionalism after he opened up a restaurant in Antwerp. This decision was made on January 15, 1930. In those days, the players were considered amateurs, and the federation forbade any commercial activity. As a result, he was deprived of participating in the 1930 World Cup. He did not appear for the national team until 1935. The Belgian public and the press were skeptical of Belgium's chances in a place so far from home. Jules Rimet had to convince the Belgian Federation for their participation as well. Belgium might have not gone had it not been for the efforts of Rimet and their FIFA representative Rudolf Seeldreyer. In the end, the South Americans were so angry at the European absences of countries like Spain, Italy, England or Hungary that they threatened secession. Uruguay would not forget this affront and went as far as to decline to participate in the 1934 and 1938 World Cups in Europe. Thus, the first World Cup was programmed to take place in Uruguay from the 13th to the 30th of July 1930. At the beginning of the 20th century, José Batia Ordóñez was the most important political figure in Uruguay, holding positions as President, Prime Minister, and President of the Senate of Uruguay, among other honors. He took advantage of the nation's stability and growing economic prosperity to institute major reforms, including increasing state intervention in economic matters. His administration helped reduce the nation's dependence on imports and foreign capital, improve workers' conditions through far-reaching social reforms, and expand education. In addition, Batia abolished the death penalty. allowed women to initiate divorce proceedings, augmented the rights of children born out of wedlock, and reduced the political influence of the Roman Catholic Church, reflecting growing trends toward social liberalization and secularization in Uruguay. In the 1920s, a consensus government emerged with policies that were more cautious than innovative, except in social legislation. Higher living standards were supported by a cattle ranching economy that had stopped growing, a dilemma hidden by the high export prices in the late 1920s. FIFA invited every country affiliated to compete. The deadline was the 28th of February 1930. The initial idea was to have 16 teams in the tournament. 2 months before the start of the tournament, no team from Europe had officially entered. As earlier mentioned, after FIFA and Uruguay efforts, 4 European teams agreed to make the trip by sea because at the time, airplane technology was far from being able to travel on such long distances. As far as the other teams that were not from Europe, on January 6, 1930, Law 6661 was passed in Peru. It was a measure to help the national team financially to the World Cup. 5 Peruvian businessmen also assisted with the funding. Brazil's preparations were hampered by an open conflict within the federation. The Rio Federation and the Sao Paulo Federation were at odds. As a result, the Sao Paulo squads boycotted the World Cup. This deprived Brazil of selecting perhaps their greatest player of the era, Arthur Friedenreich. As a result, the national team was formed only by Rio players, with only the inclusion of Sao Paulo playmaker Arakan Patuska, who had ended his contract with Santos and was now affiliated to Flamengo. The USA squad sailed from Hoboken, New Jersey, aboard the SS Monargo. The USA were a physically strong team. In the case of Argentina, they were without one of their star players, Raimundo Orsi. He had joined Juventus in Italy. He would become an Oriundi, an Italian international, and played for Italy in the 1934 World Cup, along with fellow Argentinian compatriots and Oriundis, Monti and De Maria. On January 22, 1930, Ecuador sent its $200 for registration for the World Cup, although afterwards they chose not to participate. On May 6, 1930, the Uruguay Federation asked them for their participation one more time via telegram. On July 1, 1930, Ecuador refused as they were unable to afford the traveling expenses. In the end, only 13 teams signed up. Not even qualifications were necessary. To this day, it is the only World Cup without qualification. The Romanian team formed a choir among the players while on their travels to Montevideo. During the train journeys through Italy, they impressed the Italian passengers with a rendition of Giovinezza, the official anthem of Mussolini's National Fascist Party. The Romanians boarded the SS Conteverde at Genoa, Italy. 18th of June. We arrived in Genova. It was really hard, 2 nights in second-class train compartments, 2 lost nights, hard benches, tired bones, but it was worth it. 19th of June. We left. We're on the board of Conteverde, a huge transatlantic. I can't forget departing Genova. The whole city gathered to spend time with the family and friends. On the shore, an unimaginable crowd. Orchestras, guitarists, singers, everything I imagined Italy to be. The French were picked up at Villefranche-sur-Mer in France on the 21st of June 1930. Later, the Belgians also embarked in Barcelona, Spain. 22nd of June. We're practicing on deck. We even made some training with the ball. Rafinski dropped one ball overboard. He was so annoyed he turned red. He wanted to jump after it. We were 15 days on the ship Conteverde getting out there. We embarked from Villefranche-sur-Mer in company of the Belgians and the Romanians. We did our basic exercises down below and our training on deck. The coach never spoke about tactics at all. The Conteverde carried Rimet, the trophy, and 3 designated European referees, the Belgians, Jean Langenu and Henri Christophe, along with Thomas Balde, a Parisian who may have been English. The Brazilian team were picked up on the way when the boat docked in Rio de Janeiro on the 29th of June before arriving in Uruguay on the 3rd of July. 3rd of July, Montevideo. We have arrived. Our arrival was saluted with gunfires. Thousands of people are greeting us. Yugoslavia traveled via the mail steamship Florida from Marseille, France. Mexico team also came by boat via Havana, New York, then Rio de Janeiro, and finally in Montevideo. Going into the tournament, Uruguay and Argentina were the overwhelming favorites, while France and the United States were also fielded as competitive sides. The other arrived countries were Belgium, Romania, Yugoslavia, Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Mexico, Paraguay, and Peru. Twelve referees participated in the tournament. 4 Europeans, 2 Belgians, a Frenchman and a Romanian, and 8 from South America, among them 4 Uruguayans. Of all the refereeing appointments, there were 2 that attracted the most attention. Gilberto de Almeida Rego, in the match between Argentina and France, blew for full time 6 minutes early, and the Bolivian Ulises Saucedo was also the coach of Bolivia, awarded 3 penalties in the Argentina and Mexico encounter. All matches took place in Montevideo. 3 stadiums were used: Estadio Centenario, Estadio Pocitos, and Estadio Gran Parque Central. The Estadio Centenario was built both for the tournament and as a celebration of the centenary of Uruguayan independence. Designed by architect Juan Antonio Scasso, it was the primary stadium for the tournament, referred to by Rimet as the Temple of Football. With a capacity of 90,000, it was the largest football stadium outside the British Isles. Uruguay's construction of Estadio Centenario was finished in only 8 months. The stadium hosted 10 out of the 18 matches, including both semifinals and the final. However, a rushed construction schedule and delays caused by the rainy season meant that the Centenario was not ready to use until 5 days into the tournament. Early matches were played at smaller stadiums, usually used by Montevideo football clubs Nacional and Peñarol, the 20,000 capacity Parque Central and the Pocitos. Since many players would have missed work because of this lengthy trip, the Belgian Federation gave each player 100 francs pocket money per day to cover their costs. The Uruguayan Football Association supplied all players with free tobacco, cigars and cigarettes, plus free postage for any letters sent home. On the outskirts of the city, after 6 p.m, stood many storefronts where there could be found queues of men awaiting their turn outside the brothels in what was considered controlled prostitution. To the surprise of the leaders of the Yugoslav delegation, they witnessed some of their players in the queue. Not wanting to cause a scene, they waited until the next day to warn the team about the dangers of such proclivities. Each player upon arrival in Montevideo received a pin badge from the World Cup organizing committee inscribed with the words Jugador del Campeonato Mundial. The World Cup trophy was chiseled by the French sculptor Abel Lafleur. It weighed 4 kilos, almost 9 pounds, and was called La Victoire aux Ailes d'Or, victory with golden wings. On the inauguration day, the Estadio Centenario was full. The ceremony began with trumpets and drums sounding. The delegations started coming onto the field via the north entrance. The first to march is Argentina. The flag bearer is coach Olazar. Next is France, in front with its coach Coudron, flanked by Matelet, in Langier. Up next was Bolivia, then Belgium's delegation led by coach Götnik, followed by Romania. Paraguay and Brazil entered up next. Brazil's flag bearers were Nilo and Peregrino. The national team of Chile followed with the star on their chest. Mexico, with Captain Garza Gutierrez in front. Then came the United States of America, led by trainer Cole and Captain Flory. Peru entered after that, with Astengo carrying the flag. Yugoslavia's team came with Jaksic bearing their flag. And bringing up the rear were the host of the World Cup, Uruguay. As planes flying over the stadium performed stunts, the delegations assemble in alphabetical order by the main Olimpica tribune. The ceremony ended with choreographed marches across the field to the America tribune. All the 13 teams were drawn into 4 groups. One group composed of 4 teams and 3 groups composed of 3 teams. All teams played each other once and the group winners would advance to the semi-finals. Group 1 was the only group containing 4 teams. These were Argentina, Chile, France and Mexico. Group 2 contained Brazil, Bolivia and Yugoslavia, where Brazil, the group favorites, were expected to progress. Hosts and group favorites Uruguay, along with Peru and Romania, composed Group 3. The fourth and final group contained Belgium, Paraguay and the United States of America. Back then the teams would get only 2 points for a win and 1 for a draw. France were given the honor to open the World Cup versus Mexico on the 13th of July 1930, perhaps an homage to Jules Rimet. There were actually patches of snow at the time. We were playing Mexico and it was snowing, since it was winter in the southern hemisphere. One of my teammates centered the ball and I followed its path carefully, taking it on the volley with my right foot. Everyone was pleased, but we didn't all roll around on the ground. Nobody realized that history was being made. A quick handshake and we got on with the game. And no bonus either. We were all amateurs in those days, right to the end. France's Lucien Laurent scored the first ever goal in the World Cup in the 19th minute. Goalkeeper Alex Tepol gave the ball to Chantrel, who passed to Delfour, who in turn gave it to Liberati, whose cross was volleyed by Laurent. Later, French goalkeeper Alex Tepol was injured in the 26th minute after a collision with Mexico's Dionisio Mejia. Tepol was forced to leave the field, therefore Augustin Chantrel took his place in the net and France played with one less man. The more dominant French scored more goals through Marcel Langier and a double from André Machinot. Dionisio Mejia later crossed for Juan Carreño, who pulled a goal back from Mexico in the 17th minute. Two days after France's victory over Mexico, they faced group favorites Argentina. An old rivalry between Uruguay and Argentina was expressed without questions by the majority of the audience, booing the guests in their first match against France, to that extent that the Argentinians threatened to leave the tournament. Injuries hindered France. Goalkeeper Alex Tepol had to leave the field after 20 minutes and Laurent, after a fierce tackle by Luis Monti, spent most of the match limping. Argentina dominated in the early going, but then the match was balanced out. France held out for most of the match, only succumbing to an 81st minute goal scored by Monti's free kick. The free kick had been awarded after Etienne Matelet fouled Evaristo. The French positioning in the free kick would be criticized as only 3 men stood in the defensive wall for the free kick. Just when the French were attacking relentlessly and appeared to have a chance to tie the match, the unthinkable happened. Much to everyone's surprise, Brazilian referee Gilberto de Almeida Rego blew the final whistle with more than 6 minutes still remaining. Although France had played twice in 48 hours, Chile had yet to play their first match. They faced Mexico the following day. Mexico's Manuel Rosas became the first player in the history of the World Cup to score an own goal. He scored the own goal in the 52nd minute of the match. In the end, Chile gained a comfortable 3-0 win. France's final match was against Chile. Célestin Demet and Émile Vainand replaced André Machinot and Lucien Laurent in the French lineup. It was an inconsequential match for France, who felt they had been more or less eliminated following their loss versus Argentina. As a result, they played an indifferent game. The game featured the first penalty kick of the World Cup. The first goalkeeper to save a penalty was Alex Thepot of France on the 19th of July 1930, saving from Chile's Carlos Vidal in the 30th minute of the match. Chile defeated France 1-0, with Guillermo Subiabre heading the winner in the 64th minute from a cross by Carlos Schneeberger. In Argentina's second match against Mexico, 3 penalty kicks were awarded. Some say more. During the same match, Mexico's Oscar Bonfiglio Martinez saved another penalty in the 23rd minute of the match against Argentina's Fernando Paternoster. Guillermo Stabile scored a hat-trick in his first debut as Argentina won 6-3, despite the absence of their captain Manuel Ferreira, who had returned to Buenos Aires to take a law exam. Qualification was decided by the group's final match, contested by Argentina and Chile, who had beaten France and Mexico. The game was marred by a brawl sparked by a foul on Arturo Torres by Monti. Argentina's Francisco Varallo crossed for Stabile to head home the opener. Stabile scored again a minute later. A few minutes later, Eberardo Villalobos took a shot that Argentina's goalkeeper Angel Bocio blocked between his legs. Guillermo Subiabre pounced on it and scored. In the second half, Carlos Peucheye crossed for Mario Evaristo, who scored for Argentina's third. In the end, Argentina won 3-1 against their neighbors and advanced to the semi-finals. The final table stood as such: Argentina leading with 6 points, Chile following with 4, France having 2 points won, and Mexico having won no points at all. Brazil played its first ever match in a World Cup on the 14th of July 1930 versus Yugoslavia. The Brazilian squad would struggle with Uruguay's harsh winter conditions when they arrived in Montevideo. Their own winter was mild by comparison, that you could find bathers on the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. On their World Cup debut against Yugoslavia, the temperature had dropped between 5 and 6 degrees Celsius. During the match, goalkeeper Joel's hands were so stiff that Brazilian masseuse Ovidio Nissos, nicknamed Jack Johnson because he resembled the Black American heavyweight champion, wrapped them in a towel with a hot water bag. Brazil's captain Preguinho scored Brazil's first ever goal at the World Cup. For the Brazilians, apart from Nilo, all the other players were earning their first ever caps, as was the manager, who was managing his nation for the first time. At the end of the 90 minutes, Brazil unexpectedly lost 2-1 to Yugoslavia. Bolivia had never previously won an international match. For their opener, they paid tribute to the hosts by wearing shirts each emblazoned with a single letter spelling Viva Uruguay as the team lined up. Bolivia started promising and held out for an hour before conceding, but they were 4 goals down by the final whistle. Misfortune played its part. Several Bolivian goals were disallowed. In the Brazil-Bolivia match, both teams came to play with white shirts. French referee Thomas Bellouet asked the Bolivian squad to change. Since they had no reserve kit, they borrowed Uruguay's light blue Celeste shirts. In the match, Brazil's Carvalho Leite became the youngest player in that World Cup, age 18. Against Brazil, when both teams had only pride to play for, the score was 1-0 to Brazil at halftime. Brazil added 3 more in the second half, 2 of them scored by the multi-sportsman Preguinho. The final group table saw Yugoslavia in the lead with 4 points, Brazil in second place with 2, and Bolivia came third with 0 points. Romania-Peru. On the 14th of July 1930, Romania and Peru took to the field of the Estadio Pocitos to play the first match in Group 3. It was the third match of the tournament and the first match of the day, as Brazil and Yugoslavia were scheduled to kick off later that afternoon at Parque Central. The opening match in this group saw the first player expulsion in the competition, when Placido Galindo of Peru was dismissed. Romania's Adalbert Steiner broke his leg in that match. Adalbert Deșu scored the fastest goal in the first World Cup by scoring within the first minute of the half. Peru's Luis Sousa Ferreira tied up the match from a cross from José María Lavalle. Just 2 minutes later, Constantin Stanciu scored Romania's second goal with an assist from Deșu. They later scored a third from Nicolae Kovac. The Romanians made their man advantage count. Their 3-1 win included 2 late goals. This match had the smallest crowd of any in World Cup history. The official attendance was 2,459, but the actual figure is generally accepted to be around 300. Because of construction delays on Estadio Centenario, Uruguay's first match was not played until 5 days into the tournament. The first to be held at the Centenario, it was preceded by a ceremony in honor of the Uruguayan centenary celebrations. The Uruguayan team spent the 4 weeks preceding the match in a training camp, at which strict discipline was exerted. Goalkeeper Andreas Mazzali was dropped from the squad for breaking a curfew to visit his wife. Overzealous policing was heavily criticized by the nation's press for their handling of crowd control prior to Uruguay's opening match with Peru on the 18th of July. Black market tickets and a failure to direct spectators to the assigned sectors caused overcrowding in parts of the Centenario. Police resorted to jabbing gestures with sabers to discourage encroachment onto the pitch by the fans that included women and children. Going into the game, Pedro Thea and Hector Castro combined for the latter to score from 50 meters out in the 60th minute. The hosts won a tight match against Peru 1-0. Spectators praised Peru's defense, and this turned out to be the only match in the tournament in which Uruguay scored only 1 goal. The result was viewed as a poor performance by the Uruguayan press, but praised in Peru. For the match against Romania, Uruguay made 4 changes. Domingo Tejera, Santos Urdinaran, Hector Castro and Pedro Petrone were replaced with Ernesto Mascheroni, Pablo Dorado, Hector Scarone and Juan Peregrino Anselmo Some. Sources say that Hector Castro and Pedro Petrone did not play in the Romania match because they were being rested. A much stronger Uruguay comfortably defeated the visitors, with all 4 goals coming in the first half by 4 different players: Pablo Dorado, Hector Scarone, Juan Peregrino Anselmo and Pedro Thea. Uruguay subsequently defeated Romania with ease, scoring the 4 goals in the first half. In the end, Uruguay won all its games and was first. Romania, with their victory over Peru, finished second, and Peru came in last with no victories. The American team, which contained a significant number of new caps, were reputedly nicknamed the Shot Putters by an unnamed source in the French contingent. Bart McGee became the first ever goal scorer for the USA in a World Cup. For the first goal, McGee had crossed for William Gonsalves, whose shot had hit the post and McGee had picked up the rebound. The third goal was scored just before the end. William Gonsalves passed the ball for Brown, who lobbed the ball over Baju's head and Potenod pushed it in. They beat their first opponents, Belgium 3-0. The ease of the victory was unexpected. Uruguayan newspaper Imparcial wrote that the large score of the American victory has really surprised the experts. Belgian reports bemoaned the state of the pitch and the refereeing decisions, claiming that the second goal was offside. Belgium later protested that the USA was a foreign team because of the presence of the former British professionals. However, 11 out of the 16 USA players were American-born. The group's second match, played in windy conditions, witnessed the first tournament hat-trick. Scored by Bert Potenod, the USA were now free to prepare for the semi-finals with Argentina. With the United States having secured qualification, the final match in the group was a dead rubber. Belgium's Henri de Decken and Gérard Delbecque earned their first caps for the nation. The pair had replaced Jean de Klerk and Bernard Voorhoff in the lineup. The winning goal was scored in the 40th minute in a move involving Aurelio González, Vargas and Romero that reached Delfín Benítez Cáceres, who scored with no Belgian in sight. In the end, Paraguay beat Belgium by a 1-0 margin. The final table showed a surprising USA in the first place, Paraguay in the second place, and Belgium, who had had high hopes for this tournament, in the third and last place. The four group winners, Argentina, Yugoslavia, Uruguay, and the United States, all moved to the semi-finals. The draw was made by individuals not assisting in the games. After the first draw was made pitting the USA against Argentina, the second draw was not needed. Another draw was also made to decide the dates. The first semi-final was played between the United States and Argentina on a rain-drenched pitch. USA had been humiliated by the Argentinians in the 1928 Olympics with 11-2 and were hoping for a second chance to prove themselves. USA's Ralph Tracy's leg was broken as early as the 10th minute, and the Americans were forced to play with one less man. The USA goalkeeper Jim Douglas was also injured. In addition, USA's Andy Ould played with a rag in his mouth as he was kicked by an Argentinian opponent in the mouth. James Brown also claimed that Argentina's left back kept throwing mud in his face. Argentina scored first in the 20th minute. Andrew Ould fouled Pelcel that led to a free kick. Pelcel took the ensuing dead ball that was deflected by Moorhouse, and Monty shot the rebound between Douglas' legs. In the 56th minute, Carlos Pelcel assisted Alejandro Scopelli for Argentina's second. In the 69th minute, Evaristo crossed for Stabile, whose header hit the post before going in. In the 80th minute, Manuel Ferreira passed to Evaristo, whose low cross could not be reached by either Wood nor Scopelli, but Carlos Pelcel picked it up and scored. Carlos Pelcel scored another a few minutes later, before Stabile also scored another from Evaristo's cross. Just before the end, USA's James Brown took a shot that deflected off Fernando Paternoster and back to Brown, who scored a consolation goal. The match finished 6-1 for Argentina. In the second semi-final, there were shades of the 1924 Summer Olympics, match between Yugoslavia and Uruguay. Yugoslavia took the lead first in the 4th minute. Aleksandar Tirnanic crossed from the wing, Lorenzo Fernandez failed to clear, and Georgije Vujadinovic scored for the guests. The Yugoslavs had scored another goal in the 9th minute, but that one was called off. In the 18th minute, Dorado crossed into the box. After some rebounds, the ball reached Anselmo, whose shot was stopped by the goalkeeper, but Thea followed through to score. Just 2 minutes later, Santos Iriarte's cross drew out the Yugoslavian goalkeeper and Anselmo scored. In the 31st minute, Iriarte takes another cross that Scarone did not reach, but it did reach Dorado. Dorado passed it back in the middle to Lorenzo Fernandez, who immediately gave it to Anselmo to score. In the 61st minute, a foul was called on Scarone. Lorenzo Fernandez pretended to shoot at the Yugoslavian wall, but instead passed it to Santos Iriarte to score. It is important to note Uruguay's 3rd and 4th goals were awarded despite infractions. The 3rd goal was clearly offside. Also on the 4th goal, the ball was clearly out of play, being kicked in from someone on the sidelines in the run-up that led to the goal. In the 67th minute, the Yugoslavian defense was unable to handle an Iriarte cross, and Thea pounced on the loose ball to score the 5th. By now rain also started. In the 72nd minute, Dorado crossed for Anselmo, whose hard shot hit the crossbar. Thea picked up the rebound, and after evading a Yugoslavian defender, he scored the 6th. The resounding wins for Uruguay and Argentina in the semi-finals meant the final was a repeat of the matchup from the 1928 Olympic final, which Uruguay had won 2-1 after a replay. The final was played at the Estadio Centenario on the 30th of July. By express resolution of the General Inspectorate for the Suppression of Alcoholism, the sale of all alcoholic beverages was absolutely prohibited within the Centenario for the final between Uruguay and Argentina. Feelings ran high around the La Plata basin as the Argentine supporters crossed the river with the war cry Victoria o Muerte, victory or death, dispelling any uncertainty as to whether the tournament had captured the imagination of the public. The 10 boats earmarked to carry Argentine fans from Buenos Aires to Montevideo proved inadequate, and any number of assorted craft attempted the crossing. An estimated 10 to 15,000 Argentinians made the trip, but the port of Montevideo was so overwhelmed that many did not even make landfall before kickoff, let alone reach the stadium. At the stadium, supporters were searched for weapons. The gates were opened at 8 o'clock, 6 hours before kickoff, and by noon the ground was full, the official attendance 93,000 people. A disagreement overshadowed the build-up to the match as the teams failed to agree on who should provide the ball, forcing FIFA to intervene and decree that the Argentine team would provide the ball for the first half and the Uruguayans would provide their own for the second. Uruguay made only one change from their semi-final lineup. Castro replaced Anselmo, who missed out due to the illness. Monti played for Argentina despite receiving death threats on the eve of the match. The referee was Belgian John Langenu, who only agreed to officiate a few hours before the game, having sought assurances for his safety. One of his requests was for a boat to be ready at the harbor within 1 hour of the final whistle, in case he needed to make a quick escape. As the match began, Uruguay took the lead in the 12th minute against the run of play. Pedro Thea passed to Castro, who gave it to Scarone. Scarone's shot was blocked by Fernando Paternoster. Hector Castro passed back to Dorado, whose shot went between Botasso's legs, with Evaristo trying in vain to stop it. Argentina tied up the match in the 20th minute. Lorenzo Fernandez fouled Manuel Ferreira. Evaristo took a free kick that evaded Nasazzi, Mascheroni stayed in place instead of covering Francesco Varallo, and Varallo crossed for Peusel, who scored the equalizer. Argentina took the lead in the 37th minute. A shot by Hector Castro hit the bar from where Evaristo started an Argentinian counterattack and sent a long pass to Monti. At this point, Nasazzi slowed down and raised his arm after seeing Ferreira and Stabile in a seemingly offside position. The ball reached Stabile, who scored with only the goalkeeper to beat. Nasazzi protested the decision. Langenu consulted with his linesman Henri Christophe before validating the goal. Uruguay tied the match at 2-2 in the 57th minute. Pedro Thea was fouled in the middle by José de la Torre. Lorenzo Fernandez took a free kick towards Castro, who in turn gave it to Scarone. Scarone passed it to the left side, and with Botasso exposed, Thea scored. In the 68th minute, Mascheroni broke an Argentinian attack from Varallo and took the ball upfield with no one impeding him. Finally, Monti rushed to cut him. Mascheroni crossed to Scarone, who feinted a shot and crossed for Iriarte on the left wing, who volleyed home the third goal. In the 85th minute, Andrade saved the Varallo effort right on the line. Just before the end, Scarone passed to Dorado, who crossed for Castro, which in turn headed the ball between the posts despite pressure from José de la Torre. Langenu ended the match 1 minute later, and with a 4-2 win, Uruguay added the title of World Cup winners to their mantle of Olympic champions. The football players of the Uruguay team would renew their status as the pride of the nation. The World Cup was deemed a financial success. The estimated profits for the World Cup had been 233,000 pesos. 434,000 fans had attended the 18 games. This figure was 1/4 of the population of Uruguay back then. In the aftermath of the final, the friendship between the two countries would be affected negatively for some time after the final. Players of the Argentine side had felt threatened before the game by supporters, and one player even received death threats. Argentinian supporters would also report being harassed during the event. As a revenge, the Uruguayan embassy in Buenos Aires got vandalized by citizens and the government cut off the relation to its neighboring country. At the end of the championship, the captains of the United States team, Tom Flory, and Yugoslavia's team, Milutin Ivkovic, both received bronze medals. With 8 goals scored, Guillermo Stabile was the top scorer in the tournament. In total, 70 goals were scored by 36 players, with only one of them credited as an own goal. The Brazilian newspaper, O Jornal, outlined the plan following the final whistle. The two teams would ascend to the top of the Tribuna Olímpica, and the winning team would stand on the right of the Torre del Homenaje, the homage tower, with presumably the losers on the left. Trumpets would sound as the victor's national flag would be hoisted upon the mast atop of the tower, and the municipal band played the winner's national anthem. This, however, never occurred after the match had finished. Instead of ascending to the top of the tower, the Uruguayan team remained on the pitch. The team then took a lap of honor around the pitch carrying the silver cup. Jules Rimet presented the World Cup trophy, which was later named after him, to the head of the Uruguayan Football Association, Raúl Yud. As the ceremony closed, the following day was declared a national holiday throughout the country.